Welcome to the Unstressed Exec, the podcast where we dive deep into the real conversations that help you lead, love, and live with greater clarity, courage, and calm. I'm your host, Dr. George Vergolias, executive coach and clinical forensic psychologist, and I help high-achieving professionals navigate life transitions, resolve conflict with confidence, and build unshakable psychological resilience. So if you're ready to lead with purpose, master conflict with grace, and become more emotionally agile under pressure, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Unstressed Exec, where we talk about how to perform, lead, and live with clarity, calm, and confidence, even when life feels like it's coming apart at the seams. I'm your host, Dr. George Vergolias, forensic psychologist, executive and resilience coach, and someone who has spent decades studying how the mind, the body, and behavior intersect in real relationships, real workplaces, and real lives. Now, today's topic. What we're going to talk about is something that most high performers don't learn about until their body forces the conversation. It's called allostatic load. And I want to spend a full episode on it because I've referenced it in past episodes, and I've referenced it in passing before. In our conflict avoidance episode, as well as in our boundary setting episode, and I know several others. And every time I mention it, I get questions about it. So today we're going to do a deep dive. This episode is titled Allostatic Load, What Your Body is Keeping Score of, and How to Stop the Damage. By the end of this episode, you're going to understand what allostatic load actually is at a biological level, why high achievers are disproportionately vulnerable to it, how to recognize it in your own body before it becomes a crisis, and most importantly, what you can actually do about it. Let's get into it. So to start with, let's just define what is allostatic load. To understand allostatic load, you first need to understand allostasis. Allostasis is your body's ability to maintain stability through change. When you face a stressor, a threatening email from a board member, a difficult conversation with your co-parent, a 3 a.m. spiral about your business where you wake up and you can't shut down your monkey mind. Your body responds by mobilizing resources. Cortisol spikes, adrenaline activates, heart rate increases, blood pressure rises. Blood is redirected from your digestive system to your large muscle groups. Your immune function is temporarily downregulated. It downshifts. And your executive function narrows to focus on the immediate threat. Your body has been keeping your genealogical line alive for billions of years. That's adaptive as hell. And the reason it's adaptive is it knows when it perceives a threat, it needs to mobilize your bodily resources in order to fend off that threat or run away from it. Digestion is not top of the list. Right? In fact, your frontal lobes are not top of the list quite often. It's your emotional and your bodily and your muscular system that gets activated to fight or flight or fawn if that is the proper response. Same thing with allostatic load. This is the stress response. And in short bursts, it is exquisitely adaptive. It is exactly why humans have survived predators, warfare, famine, and every category of existential threat for hundreds of thousands of years. The problem is that this system was designed for acute episodic threats, not for chronic, unrelenting ones. And modern life, particularly for executives and entrepreneurs and people navigating major life transitions, such as divorce, those are characterized by a near constant background of low to moderate stressors that never fully resolve. So while your fight or flight system is designed to mitigate a threat in an acute, immediate, and at least short-term manner, many of us are dealing with low to moderate grade stressors that are ongoing. So something has to give. Allostatic load is the cumulative biological cost of that sustained activation. It's what your body accumulates over time when the stress response is switched on more often than it's switched off. Think of this as two cups. Inside the cups is, we'll just say water, and the water represents the stress. One cup is activating stress response, cortisol arousal, hormone release, testosterone release, dealing with a fight or flight kind of neurological and limbic system activation. The other replenishes your body, right? If all you're ever doing is filling up one cup, but not filling the other, things get out of whack. And that is what allostatic load is. It's the cumulative biological loading of that activated stress response. And it needs to be switched off. It's the wear and the tear over time. And the research on it, pioneered by neuroscientist Bruce McEwen at Rockefeller University, shows that it's measurable, that it accumulates across multiple biological systems simultaneously. That's so important to understand, and that its consequences are very serious. So, what does allostatic load actually do to your body and your brain? Let's get into the neuroscience. And I want to be specific here because people often understand intellectually that stress is bad for them, but they don't have a visceral sense of the mechanisms. So, let me make this more concrete. And I'm going to start with the brain. Sustained elevated cortisol literally changes the structure of the brain. It suppresses neurogenesis in the hippocampus. That's the region responsible for memory, learning, and stress regulation. When your hippocampus is damaged, and it is hard to damage because it's kind of in the middle of the brain structure, but there are indications of when it's damaged through a lesion, a tumor, and in some cases, a really very specific blunt force or projectile force trauma. But when that's damaged, you have significant problems with memory, learning, and stress regulation. It hyperactivates the amygdala. That is your threat detection system. That is your fire alarm, making you more reactive, more vigilant, more prone to seeing danger where it doesn't exist. Now, keep in mind, a fire alarm is not there to determine if there is a fire or not. A fire alarm is there to determine if there is smoke. Think about that. Think about school. Think about the fire alarm in your kitchen. How often in your life has a fire alarm gone off and there's no fire? There might be smoke, something might be burning, maybe you burned the toast, maybe you burned the rib roast in the oven. At school, it could be a prank. It could be some kind of other glitch. But most of the time when a fire alarm, an actual fire alarm has gone off in our life, there's no fire. It's not uncommon that your amygdala, your internal threat detection system, your internal fire alarm is going to go off when there really isn't a threat there. But we've convinced ourselves that there's a threat. You get that email from your boss, or you simply get a voicemail from your boss, or even a text message that simply says, call me. Call me can mean many, many things. There's nothing in call me that suggests it's a problem, it's good or bad. It's very neutral. But if you have bad relation with that boss, if that boss is toxic, if there's a history of that boss going off on you, your amygdala is likely to spike and say, oh shit, the boss wants to talk to me. This must be bad. So your amygdala, the goal is to set off the fire alarm, even if there isn't necessarily a fire. Your amygdala's job is not to determine the nature of the threat. That's what your frontal lobes need to do. The amygdala's job is to ring the alarm bells and say, get aware, get ready, heighten your senses. Think back 80, 100, 150,000 years ago in our early human form. And I know there's a lot of variation of when that began, but I'm just picking some time frames there. You're living in a cave. You hear rustling outside the cave at 2 a.m. Your partner, your wife, the woman that you're mating with is sleeping. Your offspring is sleeping. If your amygdala doesn't say that might be a tiger or a bear, there's a good chance that your progeny didn't exist. If you walked out there assuming every time, oh, that's just a field mouse, one of those times it was going to be a predator animal and you were going to be in big trouble. So again, the amygdala is the fire alarm. It's supposed to trigger. The problem is we as humans in our modern form, we have not learned to discern what that fire alarm is telling us. And so we tend to overreact. We tend to react as if there is a danger when there isn't. And when the amygdala fires like that, it compromises the prefrontal cortex. That's your center for executive function, decision-making, impulse control, and nuanced thinking. In the most practical terms, sustained high stress makes you more reactive, less able to think clearly, more likely to make poor decisions, and worse at regulating your own emotional responses. The very capacities that define high performance are the first to degrade when you need them. Chronic stress is one of the most significant modifiable risk factors for cardiovascular disease. Right now, if you have significant cardiovascular problem, one of the biggest things you can do is lower your stress response, manage your stress. And many ways to do that. One, manage the environment, get the new job, move out of that house that's giving you so much stress, set boundaries with people in your life that are stressing you out, or learn to manage that internally, right? Meditation, focused identification of what the problem is, breathing, other types of recommendations that I go into in other podcast episodes, as well as my workbook. The key here, though, is elevated cortisol and adrenaline over time. They increase arterial inflammation. They literally inflame your arteries. They raise blood pressure chronically, and they accelerate atherosclerosis. And the research linking high demand, low control work environments, which is a classic profile for driven executives, is to elevate cardiac risk. It's substantial, and it has been well replicated again and again. Said another way, the research says that if you are in a executive or entrepreneurial or management leader role, the actual role actually contributes itself to elevated cardiac risk, given the nature of the role and the demands placed upon people. And then we have the immune system. Chronic stress dysregulates immune function in many, many complex ways. Initially by suppressing it, suppressing that immune function, but then in some cases, driving it toward chronic low-grade inflammation. In a way, it's your body's immune system trying to regulate stress and the hormonal imbalances that stress causes, so it actually begins attacking itself. And so people with certain skin conditions can be exacerbated, for example, by stress. And this is linked to increased susceptibility to illness, slower healing, and over time, even elevated risk for autoimmune conditions. Then, of course, we have sleep. High allostatic load disrupts our sleep architecture. It literally disrupts the function and the structure of our sleep. It reduces our time in restorative deep sleep and REM, rapid eye movement, which is the phase in which we're dreaming. It increases nighttime cortisol, which is the enemy of sleep. And it creates cycles where poor sleep increases stress reactivity, which further disrupts sleep. It really becomes a vicious cycle. The worse you sleep, the higher cortisol arousal you have, the higher stress response hormones and neurotransmitters are active, which lowers your ability to tolerate stress during the day, which in turn, can you guess it? Fucks up your sleep, which in turn raises that shit even more. So it becomes a vicious cycle over time. And this is one of the most important and significant vicious cycles in the clinical picture of burnout. If you feel burned out, or you have team members or co-partners or fellow entrepreneurs that are clearly at a point of burnout, start with sleep. Look at this sleep cycle. It's devastating. And then, of course, there's mental health. The relationship between allostatic load and depression and anxiety is bidirectional. It goes in both directions, and it is well established. Stress affects depression. Depression makes stress worse. Stress impacts anxiety. Having anxiety makes our stress response worse. So again, it's bidirectional, and it can also be circular. Sustained biological stress loading increases the risk of clinical depression and anxiety disorders. And depression and anxiety, in turn, they amplify the stress response. And this is how chronic stress becomes clinical pathology. Many people that have depression or anxiety don't start with clinical levels of depression and anxiety. They start with stressors, and they start with stress. And then that becomes a sustained stress response. And that in turn becomes an ingrained pattern of attempting to cope, although maladaptively. And that maladaptive coping response, you guessed it, that becomes clinical depression or clinical anxiety. And yes, of course, there are biochemical and neurochemical and even genetic relations here, of course, but we cannot overplay the role that stress has in that cycle of mental health, particularly with depression and anxiety. So I talk a lot about the high achiever and the dilemma and the burdens on them. So in this context with allostatic load and stress response, I now want to put some of our attention on the high achiever's specific vulnerability because I think it's worth giving that some attention. So I'm going to address something that I see in my practice consistently, and that is that high achievers often have very high thresholds for noticing their own suffering. And when we think of high thresholds, we might think, oh, that's good. If you have a high threshold for pain or a high threshold for other people's bullshit, whatever, that's good. It's not good when you have a very high threshold for noticing your own suffering. In physical terms, what that means is that you can put your hand over a burning burner that's on, and if it takes you 15 seconds to notice that your hand is hot, that's a problem. You're going to burn the hell out of your hand. There actually are people with pain conditions where they don't feel pain all that significantly, or they don't feel it quickly. And they could get into some trouble because they're engaging in activity that's damaging their bodies, but their pain receptors are not firing. Their alarm system isn't on, right? For high achievers who have high thresholds for noticing their own suffering, they have been trained by experience, by success, by identity to interpret discomfort as the price of high performance, to push through, to suck it up, to pull up their pants, to pull up their boots, to not complain, to see rest as weakness and self-care as indulgence. And it's critical to recalibrate the software that's operating in your brain if you're someone that's living like this. And what's funny is many high achievers follow sports. And if you follow LeBron, or right now the World Cup's going on, this is being filmed on July 4th. If you follow individuals like this, Ronaldo, David Beckham, I know he's retired, but any of these high performant elite athletes, none of us get annoyed as a sports fan when our elite athlete pulls a hamstring or twists an ankle and they stay out for a few games and they rest and they rehabilitate. We all get that. No, we totally understand. Totally do that, right? Pulisic from the U.S. men's soccer team stayed out the prior game because he had a calf strain. We all understood it. We get it. We would like them to play, but we understand that in the sports world. Very few of us get that in the executive or management leader world. We think we have to keep pushing through, and that is the biggest fallacy. And what this means is that by the time most high achievers register that something is seriously wrong, the allostatic load is already very high. The damage is already being done. The body has been sending signals for months, or in some cases years, through irritability, sleep disruption, decreased enjoyment, increased cynicism, physical symptoms, burnout, withdrawal, social disengagement, relationship, marital disengagement. And those signals have been overridden, minimized, or flat out ignored. The executive who is snapping at their team, the entrepreneur whose creativity has dried up, the divorced parent who feels nothing, not joy, not grief, just flat. The leader who used to love their work and now dreads Monday morning. These are not character failures. They are biological signals of a system that has been running above sustainable capacity for way too long. So the question becomes, how do you measure your own allostatic load? Well, you don't need a lab panel to get a meaningful sense of where you are. Here are the indicators that I use clinically, both in my therapy practice and especially in my executive and entrepreneurial coaching. First, sleep quality and recovery. Do you fall asleep easily? Do you stay asleep? If you do wake up, are you restored in the morning? If you do wake up in the middle of the night, can you go back asleep? Or is your mind racing and worrying and you can't turn off monkey mind? Or do you wake exhausted regardless of how many hours slept? Now, that certainly can be a condition such as sleep apnea, But what we also know is that sleep apnea is negatively affected by stress as well. So look at your sleep. Second, emotional reactivity. Are you more reactive, irritable, or emotionally volatile than your baseline? Are small things starting to trigger disproportionate responses? Third, cognitive sharpness. Is your concentration impaired? Are you making more errors than usual? Is creative thinking harder to access? Fourth, physical symptoms such as headaches, gastrointestinal disruption, chronic muscle tension, frequent illness. These are often the body's early stress signals. You have to pay attention to these because if they're there, there's a reason for that. And they're not going to remit on themselves. Next, anhedonia. So, anhedonia is a clinical term which means the loss of enjoyment in things that used to bring you pleasure or satisfaction. This is one of the most clinically significant signals. Maybe you enjoyed biking. Maybe you enjoyed motorcycling. I love fly fishing. If I ever lose my interest in fly fishing, my fiance, soon to be wife, will know something's wrong with me, right? That's anhedonia. And often high executives or entrepreneurial, highly driven individuals, we won't say we lost pleasure. We'll just make the excuse we don't have time. And that could be for a little bit. That could be for weeks, even months. If you have a launch or you're in a new company environment, and you're in a big growth trajectory. There's a lot of reasons that people in high test, high pressure roles might feel that. But if that's sustained for months and months and months, that you can't make time for the things that you enjoy the most, you very well may be experiencing anhedonia. Time to take a look at that. So sixth is recovery speed. After a stressful event or a prolonged effort level of trying to do something, how long does it take you to return back to baseline? High allostatic load slows recovery time. So let's say I'm actually about to go off for a week to go to the beach, the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Often it'll take me about a day and a half, maybe two at the most, just to unwind and really enter vacation mode. I don't think that's too unusual. When that starts getting to 3, 4, or 5 days before I can unwind, that's a big negative red flag that I need to be aware of. That recovery speed is not what it needs to be. So if you are scoring poorly on several of these, and let me review these again: sleep quality and recovery, emotional reactivity, cognitive sharpness, physical symptoms, anhedonia, and recovery speed. If you are scoring poorly on several of these, your body is telling you something important, and it really deserves to be heard. So we just spoke about some of the warning flags. So the next question is, what actually reduces allostatic load? What helps? I'm going to go through a few things that are very pragmatic. These are things that you literally can leave this episode and begin putting into implementation. These are things, by the way, that I go through in my coaching practice with almost every client that I see because they're so universally beneficial. And I have entire chapters devoted to these in my workbook, which I highly recommend. So let's be specific and clinically honest about this. There are a lot of things marketed as stress reduction that are not meaningfully addressing allostatic load. One of the biggest is acknowledging you're stressed. There is some wonderful research done by Basil Van der Voort, where, and in a great book written as well called The Body Keeps Score. And it's very deep, and it's about trauma, and it's about the effect of stress over time. And I highly recommend the book. But one thing I just want to highlight here, and it goes to the title of the book, The Body Keeps Score, is just acknowledging intellectually that you've been stressed or traumatized, or what traumatized you, or what stresses you. Acknowledging it is only half the battle. You might even understand the precursors to it. You might understand your patterns to it as well. That is only half the battle because you are still operating at a primal emotional level. For many of us, if we've been in that stress response cycle for years, we are still operating off that software loop. And it's important that we rewire that. We reset that loop. We redesign, or if you're going to use a technical term, we recode the software. It's very important. And so just being aware of what stresses me out, or yeah, this triggers me because it reminds me of how my dad treated me, and now I'm aware of that, that's only half the battle. Because our body still is operating as if we are that 6-year-old boy getting yelled at by dad. Another thing is a weekend retreat doesn't undo years of biological accumulation. If it makes you feel great, it could certainly give you the tools that you need to move forward. I do intensives sometimes with my coaching clients. I offer occasional weekend intensives with my coaching clients. I've not offered them to the public yet. That will be coming soon. And we do a lot of wonderful work, but I open the weekend saying, this weekend isn't going to fix you. This weekend is going to set in motion awareness and the tools that you have to begin a fairly long process of fixing yourself. But the weekend retreat, it's not going to undo years of biological bullshit or software in your head. A single good night's sleep doesn't reset a chronically dysregulated, shitty sleep cycle, right? What the research supports as generally effective are 5 things that I'm going to talk about right now that reduce allostatic load. And the first, not surprising, sleep. And this is non-negotiable. It's foundational. Sleep is when your nervous system down regulates. Think of a car. It's when your nervous system downshifts. It goes into those lower RPMs. And any engine needs some of the lower RPMs, right? It can't always run. None of us are an F1 engine. We can't operate at high RPMs all the time. And even an F1 engine will blow out if it's not handled well by the driver. Your brain consolidates during sleep and processes. Cortisol normalizes and regulates, and cellular repair occurs. All of this happens at sleep. 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep is not a luxury. It is a biological requirement for sustained high performance. Protecting it really has to be your priority. Number 2, movement. Regular aerobic exercise is one of the most potent interventions for allostatic load in the research literature. I'm going to add resistance training. And I'm a fan, as I get older especially, I am a fan of lighter loads for more reps. I even started using exercise bands. I'm a long-term power lifter, but occasionally and within reasonable adaptive capacity for your own physique and strength, move heavy shit. That's how I can say it. Move heavy shit. It matters. Both aerobic exercise and resistance training, they both directly reduce cortisol. They promote neurogenesis in the hippocampus. They improve sleep architecture, and they have robust antidepressant and anxiolytic effects. Anxiolytic is a fancy term for anti-anxiety. In short, these reduce depression. They reduce anxiety. And the dose matters, by the way. Just doing a little bit, the dose really matters. The science is clear here. 150 minutes of moderate activity per week, minimum. That's basically 2.5 hours. That can be broken up, however, into daily segments. So my current regimen right now, and partly this is related to my schedule and a few other things, and a little bit of some recovery of a shoulder and a knee issue. I do 2 resistance training episodes a week for about an hour to an hour and 20 minutes. And then I do 2 to 3 cardio. 2 of those 3 are focused on zone 2 aerobic activity, and 1 is VO2 max activity. And then lastly, I work in at least 3 of those workouts. I build in mobility and balance training. So I'll be on a Bozo ball, or I'll be on a weight balance board. I'll do something else especially as you get older, it's important to keep that cerebellum balance activity in place. Okay. 3, what reduces allostatic load? Social connection. Genuine, regulated social connection. The kind where you feel seen and safe. This activates the ventral vagal system, and it directly counteracts the threat state. And your vagal system is the system within your body that really helps with regulating or upregulating, downregulating and upregulating your central nervous system response. And loneliness, by contrast, is associated with elevated allostatic load independent of other stressors. Your relationships are literally biological medicine. The longest longitudinal study ever done is the Harvard longitudinal study on adult well-being. It's been named a few different things over the years. It is roughly 70 years long, and they looked at a number of biological and social determinant markers and tracked people over many years and determined what is the most beneficial for just happiness and well-being. And they looked at diet, they looked at working out, they looked at presence or absence of mental health. They looked at the socioeconomic status, how wealthy you were, what resources you had, what was your family makeup, did you have supports, did you not? And nothing came close to social connection. Social connection was the single best predictor of happiness and well-being in old age. Full stop. So again, your relationships are literally biological medicine. You could have one really good close friend, but nurture that connection. Don't isolate. Get out. Get involved. Okay. Fourth, nervous system regulation practices. This is a large group. And again, I go into a lot of this in my workbook on conflict resolution called The Conflict Whisperer. I also go into this in other podcast episodes. But these are breath-based practices, particularly those that extend the exhale. So box breathing, which is a count of 4, 7, 8. Breathing, coherent breathing. There's a few different descriptions of this. They directly activate the parasympathetic nervous system and reduce physiological arousal. So box breathing is just imagine a box in front of your face, and each box represents 4 seconds, and you're breathing in for 4, holding it for 4, out for 4, holding it for 4, right? 4, 7, 8 method is you're breathing in for 4 seconds, you're holding it for 7, and you're breathing out for 8 or longer. Your exhale, sometimes you want it to be a bit longer. So it's in for 4, hold for 7, out for 8, okay? And then coherent breathing is just another type of methodology. And then of course you have the William Puff meeting breathing, which is focused on very deep inhales and full exhales till you have nothing left in your lungs. And the idea behind that is similar, but you're also really getting to those recessed areas of your lung capacity that we rarely activate unless we're full on sprinting, and doing really high level VO2 max activity. All of these, though, they do activate that parasympathetic nervous system. These are not soft skills. They're evidence-based biological interventions, and they have a cumulative impact. So yes, they help you calm down right now. They're not going to get rid of all your stressors, but they will help you calm down a few degrees right now. But if you do them consistently, daily, over time, you are actually beginning to rewire your neuronal pathways in your brain, and you're rewiring, in a sense, that software loop, that parasympathetic nervous system software loop. So over time, even if you're not having a stressful day, it's helpful to do. And last, meaning and control also help reduce allostatic load. Research on occupational stress consistently shows that the most damaging combination is high demand plus low control. So those of you listening, I want you to take a moment and think about your job. Are you in high demand, or is your role high stress, high demand, high test, high pressure? Think about that for a minute. And now ask the question, how much control or agency do I have over my day, over my week? Do I have 80% control of how I deal with that high demand? Or am I mostly micromanaged? Or am I mostly boxed in? If you are answering this as yes, I have high demand, high test, high pressure, and low control, That's problematic. Because restoring agency, even in small ways, and reconnecting to meaning in one's work and life, these are not just motivational platitudes. They are actually neurobiological interventions that reduce the threat appraisal that drives the threat response. So it's really important to regain that empowerment and that agency. And it may not be your boss is going to give it to you. You may need to find it in your work life. What are the things that I still have control over? I'm a spiritual guy. I'm not a very religious guy, but I do still like the serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I can, the patience to let go of the things I cannot, and the wisdom to know the difference. It does take wisdom to know that difference. But even in small ways, you could still bring in empowerment and agency into the roles you have. At some point, it might be you got to move on to a new relationship, a new town, a new job. Those are tougher decisions, but at some point, we may need to do that. In this section with meaning and control, I want to add one more thing. People are not burned out. You are not burned out because you're doing too much. So often we think that. We think we're burned out because we're doing too much. We're juggling too much. We are not burned out because we're doing too much. We are burned out because we're not doing enough of what makes us come alive. And if you doubt that, I want you to reflect back on a stressful time where you were very busy, but you were doing something that was exciting or enjoyment based. Maybe planning a wedding, planning a honeymoon, planning your father's retirement party, whatever it may be. And you're busy, you're stressed, you got a lot going on, but it doesn't feel the same, does it? But when we start feeling burnout, it's because we have that high demand and low control, and we have that low meaning. We're not doing enough of what makes us come alive. All right, some closing reflections. And thank you for walking with me for this last 40 minutes or so. Your body is not the enemy. If you take anything away from today, your body is not the enemy. It is not weak for struggling under impossible loads. It is doing exactly what it evolved to do, which is signaling as loudly as it can that something needs to change. Your alarm systems are working, and that's a good thing. The question is whether you're listening. The most sustainable version of high performance is not built on ignoring biological reality. It's built on understanding it well enough to work with it rather than against it. Recovery is not the opposite of performance. It is the condition for it. Again, think of your favorite sports star. He or she gets hurt. They need to take a day or two off. You inherently understand that. Maybe they need to take the rest of the season off. And while that sucks, you inherently understand that. If they blow out an ACL, you get it. Take the time off, recuperate, recover, come back stronger next season. But we don't apply that to ourselves in our daily lives or in our work lives. That's a bullshit software loop that we need to rewire. Your body is keeping score, and the score matters. So start reading it. Okay, if today's episode resonated and you're ready to continue this work, I invite you to check out my workbook, The Conflict Whisperer, From Conflict to Clarity. It's a practical, no bullshit guide to rebuilding self-trust, strengthening boundaries, and navigating relationships with clarity instead of fear. It's available now on Amazon. I'll drop a link in the show notes. And remember, insight without action changes nothing. If you're ready to turn healing into momentum and clarity into confidence, coaching can be the catalyst. And make no doubt, coaching will change you. You can find me at www.theunstressedexec.com or on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube as The Unstressed Exec. Until next time, I'm Dr. George Vergolias. Thanks for listening. And remember, shift happens.